Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am Jeff South, a freelancer and retired journalism professor from the United States. While additional members of our audience drift in, here are a few housekeeping items, including background about this online event. The international community of the Society of Professional Journalists is dedicated to promoting press freedom globally and helping American journalists better understand the close links between global and local events. We also bring together journalists from around the world to better understand the conditions and issues facing us all. The format for this session is simple. The guests and I will have a conversation, and we want you to be part of it. If, along the way, you have a question, please use the Q&A function. I will try to work in as many of the questions as our conversation progresses. We want to keep the chat box free to help share information as well. This talk is being recorded and will be placed in our YouTube channel. The co-chair of the international community, Dan Kubisky, is putting the URL for that in the chat window now. He also is including the URL for the community's website, where you can sign up for its weekly newsletter. And with that, let's get right to the conversation. I'd like to start by asking our two online guests to introduce themselves and tell us about their connection to fact-checking. Doja, will you please go first?
Great, thank you very much for that. And thank you, Dan and SBJ, for this opportunity to talk about our story and share what we do in Mongolia here. My name is Doja Batter. I am one of the founding members of Mongolian Fact-Checking Center, which is Mongolia's only IFCN signatory fact-checking center, and recently became Meta's third-party fact-checking partner in Mongolia. So we are now in month 2 of this partnership. And how I got into fact-checking and why I started doing this is pretty much as the reason I started was pretty much like a game. Like, I liked the idea of playing around with the tools to identify photos or videos. I thought those were very cool. But I also realized that Mongolian journalists didn't have the tools and knowledge to use those tools and play with them. So my partner and I, we started a Facebook page where we posted like how we checked photos, and like it was pretty much a very easygoing, fun, almost entertaining page, which evolved into Mongolian Fact-Checking Center, probably also because of COVID. The need and demand for fact-checking in Mongolia became more serious. So that's me. Thanks.
Great. And Ferdi, how about you? What's your background?
So yes, this is always a difficult question to answer when it comes to about yourself, isn't it? Well, my name is Ferdi Oso. I am the program manager at the International Fact-Checking Network, which Doja just referred to, and the Mongolian Fact-Checking Center has become a part of this growing network that we have here. How did I get into fact-checking? I might look young, but it's the opposite. About 12, almost 12 years ago, I was living in Turkey then, doing my master's, and completed my master's there. And while I was living in Turkey, I am Turkish by my parents are Turkish, so I had the opportunity to live in the country for about 10 years. But in those 10 years, there were a lot of uprisings in terms, not uprising against the government, but there's a lot of protests happening. And the most notable one, probably everybody knows, is the Gezi protests. And in these moments, we saw a lot of misinformation happening in Turkey. And you know, I was out there as well, and seeing what was happening. In the long run, I didn't think that this was going to hold up. And the information about the protest, the information that was surrounding why the protest was happening, was always being diluted and taken to extreme corners. I mean, conspiracy theories that you can't even comprehend to think of how they put these together. So a few friends and I got together and said, hey, it literally started like this. We need to do something about this. And what can we do? What can we do? So we started doing some research online and saw that fact checking was still at its very birth in the US, not right at the very birth, but it was still just gaining traction in the US with factcheck.org, with the Washington Post and its Pinocchios, and PolitiFact. PolitiFact is a part of the Poynter Institute, which I should have led with. The Poynter Institute is the institute that the Poynter Institute for Media and Journalism is the institute that houses the International Fact-Checking Network. And PolitiFact is a part of this brand as well. So, you know, it was three kids basically trying to do something that would last longer than the protests. We saw that the protests weren't going somewhere. So we thought that we need to create something that can hold individuals who are sharing misinformation accountable, not accountable, but, you know, bring those to light, and hold politicians and politicians to what they say. We were fact-checking politicians at first. So we weren't debunking or verifying photos. We were directly going into the minutes of the parliament sessions and trying to figure out what was being said, listening to all the speeches on TV, only focusing on political fact-checking was what we were doing at the very beginning. That's how I started fact-checking. I mean, it was a moment of time where a few friends got together and said, "Hey, we need to do something about this," and we formed our fact-checking organization in Turkey. It's in its 10th year now. We started with 3 people. Now there's 14 people working at the office, which is an amazing feeling to be a part of that. And now I'm a part of something larger, and that's growing the community within the world as well. Everybody has their own stories. Doja started off by just, you know, having this urge of investigating stuff. Everyone comes from a different point of angle, and we all meet at the same place, which is facts matter, and we need to say that as much as we can, because we're very little in the world of 6 billion, with 135 organizations who abide by the IFCN Code of Principles, which we'll get into. I don't want to take up any more time, so Jeff, please.
Okay. Well, by way of background, I was asked to moderate this discussion because I recently worked with Doja's organizations in Mongolia as a Fulbright Specialist. I spent 6 weeks in Ulaanbaatar holding workshops on data journalism and fact-checking and consulting with the Nest Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development and the Mongolian Fact-Checking Center. Also, one of my first newspaper jobs back in the 1970s, I was the education editor for a newspaper in Phoenix, Arizona, and I had the opportunity then to work with the person who later would found PolitiFact, Bill Adair. So I have a small connection to fact-checking. At any rate, with that backdrop, let's get down to some questions of substance and the issue of fake news and fact-checking. Ferdi, just how bad is the fake news situation in the world that required the founding of the IFCN?
I mean, where do we begin is the answer. It's not in the greatest shape. As the days go by, it's getting worse and worse. The extent of how social media spreads misinformation is a plague. It's an infodemic of its own, and it's going to continue grow as the internet grows, and as the internet takes different shapes in the future with these talks of the metaverse and something. These this is going to get worse because there's going to be different types of ways that people are going to be able to communicate with each other. So I don't see it being slowed down at any point, because it's also a tool for many governments to deploy their thoughts, their propagandas. So this is, especially with this internet age, I mean, it's easier to be done than ever. Before, gossip was the misinformation. Now we have memes, for God's sake, you know what I mean? So the way information travels is going to affect how misinformation progresses. When it comes to the IFCN, when it comes to the International Fact Checking Network, it was not founded on the anticipation of misinformation. Of course, it was founded on the organizations were founded on the anticipation of misinformation, but the network was founded on basically bringing fact checkers together to a place. It started all with a conference, a global fact conference, which where my story starts, and this is where I want to start it off. So in 2013, I went to the Global Fact in London. Then there was only 40 people. Bill Adair was there. That's when I first met Bill. And those organizations gave me a lot of things to bring back home. The next year felt like 2 years for me, because of all the things that we learned from those 40 people, I was able to implement this in our organization, in our country. Now, fast forward 2022, there was 95 organizations present last June in Oslo, over 600 people. Now, this community has come together because of the very nature of building a community, of also helping and promoting each other's works and best practices. That's what led to the creation of the IFCN, which also brought standards to fact checking. So the IFCN runs, the IFCN has its own code of principles. The code of principles is how organizations should be reflected, how they should reflect their work towards their readers. Who are they? Where do they get funded? What is their methodologies to use while they're fact checking? And of course, we're all humans, from time to time, we make mistakes as well. Just because we're fact checkers doesn't mean that we know everything. It's not that we know everything. We research things. We try to gain the knowledge, which is what everybody should be doing in the first place. If you're confronted with a piece of misinformation, not even a piece of information, any information, if there's a thought in your head at that very moment, stop and just take a minute, go back, Google it, for God's sakes, even Wikipedia it. Don't share it or pollute the environment when you're the first line of defense, because that's where it's all going to start.
Great. It's interesting that you brought up Global Fact 9, the conference recently held in Oslo, because I understand that Doja was there. And Doja, perhaps you can share with us some takeaways from the latest conference.
Please do. I would. It was her first time at the Global Fact, so it's always great to hear from first-time Global Fact participants.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And sorry, Jeff, for abandoning you to go to Oslo and participate in Global Fact, because that was the time when Jeff was there. It was probably by the end of his time with us in Mongolia, the end of the project. So sorry for that. Yeah, it was very interesting. So we have been a member of IFCN for for exactly 1 year before we participated in Global Fact 9. And actually we went there with a pretty huge team, like 4 of us went there to actually kind of not most importantly to learn stuff, but actually to become part of the community. And that community was so vibrant, so like down to earth, but like there's so much that we can learn from that community, and how they have been advancing the practice of fact-checking globally was beyond what we could imagine doing in Mongolia. So we did come back with a lot of takeaways and a lot of to-do tasks. And one of them was just yesterday, we had a confirmation from EJC because we had a opportunity to attend one of Craig Silverman's workshops. We asked him if we could bring the verification handbooks, all 3 of them, to Mongolia. And we just got off a call with EJC yesterday where we had the confirmation to bring those books into Mongolia so that the practice of fact-checking can be more educational, also practical, and also we could learn better why we are doing what we are doing. So it's not just for Mongolian Fact-Checking Center, but also for all the fact-checking operations and all the media organizations in Mongolia and journalists, academia alike. So this is going to be a new knowledge that's going to be coming to Mongolia because of Global Fact 9. So that's just one example. And we have so many other things in mind that we haven't gotten into actually making a work yet. But this is a very big community now who has a very same value for everyone. They have different approaches of doing it in their own respective countries, but the core value, the core mission of each organization in an essence is the same. So whatever happens, like this community is always behind you and they're always ready and willing to help you with whatever you need so that you will not waste any more resource of your very valuable time and very valuable fact-checking team and can do everything, at least most things, the best way that has been invented yet. So this was a very comforting and rewarding feeling to feel ourselves and know that we are part of something that's so great. And I'm not just saying this because Ferdi is here on this call, but that's really the kind of emotion that we came back with. And it's still kind of fresh because it hasn't been so long. Yeah.
Wow. Well, congratulations on the new collaboration with the European Journalism Center. I think that's terrific. And it'll be a win-win both for the MFCC and Mongolian journalists and for the European Journalism Center to have the verification handbooks translated into yet another language. So that's really cool. Let's see, Ferdi, so what are some of the most pernicious falsehoods on the international stage? You know, from that global outlook, that global perspective that you have, you know, do the misinformation and disinformation that you see revolve around particular topics, politics, health, things that you see over and over?
Right. Absolutely. Well, we lived 2 years of it. COVID-19 was and still is one of the most leading misinformations, one of the most leading misinformation. It could be pictures, it could be videos. There's a whole lot of stuff out there. COVID-19 is and is going to continue to be one of those high points. The war in Ukraine was another topic because it not only it was not only in Europe, it crossed borders into many different other countries, especially the former Soviet Union countries. We have these 2 main topics. We needed to create a database in order to follow up with these with the fact checks around the world. My day-to-day dealings with the organizations. I'm no longer fact checking, but what we're trying to do is try to work around these major topics so that there's enough data for researchers, so there's enough data for other fact checkers to be able to use other fact checks around the world to support their work as well. So the COVID-19 Coronavirus Alliance database is one of the databases that we have. at the IFCNs, and it started at the very beginning of COVID-19. So from January 2020 till now, there's over 18,000 fact checks done on misinformation on COVID-19. 18,000 fact checks across the globe from 112 organizations. For the Ukraine crisis, we, with our partners, have developed Maldita, a fact-checking organization in Spain, who started an initiative called the Ukraine Facts. Ukrainefacts.org, if anybody wants to visit it. Ukrainefacts.org is a website where, again, all the fact checkers in our network are filling the database. These, something about the Ukraine crisis, the war, can show up in the neighboring countries of the country, but at the same time, that misinformation is shown in the Philippines, in Korea, in India, in Turkey, in the US. There's a lot of misinformation that is floating throughout the globe. So that has added to that. And of course, there's many other different types of topics: climate change, health, education. In the next few months, I'm going to be working on something on climate change. I don't want to say anything about it right now because it's still in the works. I don't want anybody to quote me or say, "Hey, Ferdi, where is that?" But climate is going to be another area of focus for us. Again, probably in the format of the databases. So these are some of the topics that are plaguing the world. Of course, each region has its own issues as well. Each country has its own issues, their own political instabilities. With the world, we might be polarized in the US, but the world is polarized at the moment. This polarization fuels misinformation on every topic you can even think of. Those are the main two topics that we're floating around, but it's not only those two topics. Economy is a huge issue for a lot of the countries around the world. So when it's on a global scale, that's when the IFCN comes in and says, "Hey guys, maybe we should do something about this." You know what I mean? Because we have that ability to be able to muster the troops, you know what I mean? Like, we could get all of those fact checkers into one room at any point, and it's a really amazing feeling. I mean, it's like what Doja said, it's a community that's banded together. It's a wonderful thing. It really is, and I'm really proud to be a representative of this idea of bringing people together.
Cool. I'd like to emphasize again that we want to make this a conversation for folks who are listening to this discussion online in real time. And so if you've got questions, please post them in the Q&A. And we happen to have a question from Linda Austin. And let me pose that question to Doja. So Linda asks, what are the critical fact-checking skills that you would most like all journalists to learn? So Doja, I know that you, of course, do a lot of training with your staff. So what are some of the skills that you impart to your staff and that you think that every journalist should make part of their toolkit?
Currently with our team, first of all, thank you, Linda, for that question. And Linda is actually our Nest Centers. Nest Center is Mongolian Fact Checking Center's parent organization. Linda is Nest Center's long-term mentor, who's been helping us a lot in terms of doing right actions in Mongolia to advance democracy and freedom of expression. And also our fact-checking operation. So thank you very much for that question. So I would actually say there are two levels of skills and knowledges that we think we should offer or people should have. So for instance, for our fact checkers, we're currently trying to learn more advanced tools where we can probably monitor websites or pages. In a sense, that way we can automate some of our monitoring activities. Whereas for most journalists, I think it's essential that your basic journalism skills are as good for for being a fact checker, but it's just actually you have to act on it. Like most of the falsehoods that we debunk that have circulated in Mongolia, for instance, they require very basic skills to actually debunk them. Currently at this level, it's just because people are, as Ferdi said at the very beginning of this webinar, people kind of just act on it, on their first impression after they receive an information, they just directly share it. So if they stop to think and actually type that question on Google, even Wikipedia can provide a way better insight into the problem at hand, the question that you have. So for journalists, it's the skill that they need is something that they already have. But what I would say is to start using them and acting on it on their everyday life as well. Because also another problem that we have in Mongolia is journalists tend to treat their professional media output and their personal, for instance, Facebook page as totally separate things. Whereas the readers, they don't think their Facebook is their Facebook page. They don't think it's their very personal space. Instead, they think because this journalist tweeted this, because this journalist posted it, this must be true. So that in a way it amplifies the falsehood in opposition to whether if it was posted on somebody that they didn't on a page of somebody that they didn't recognize. So it's very basic. Just start verifying anything that you're posting or publishing. And thank you for that, Linda, again.
Ferdi, let me pose the same question to you. Are there, particular critical thinking skills or other practices that journalists should adopt that kind of grow out of the fact-checking methodology that the network espouses?
I think Doja really covered the very essence of it, but I think there can be additional trainings at the very start of individuals' careers, especially journalist students at the universities. There could be, it's like what Doja was saying a few minutes ago, how to use these tools, what types of tools are out there. There's a vast resources. The verification handbook is absolutely one of the two go-to handbooks for verifiers and debunkers out there. Yeah, verifying and debunking might not seem like a part of journalism, but it's absolutely a part of journalism. It's because that's what journalists do. They verify and debunk stuff. They need to be able to get the story correct. So there's a lot of tools for newly upcoming journalists that can benefit from these fact-checking tools, not only to fact-check, but also for their own paths, let's say, of where they want to take their journalism. It's a good practice to have. And fact-checking is not something new. It's been being done for a long time. Magazines, newspapers, all used to have a fact-checking unit within their squads, their teams, to be able to verify the information they're about to print. It's at the very core of journalism. It's a part of our daily life. So I do not have a specific thing for upcoming journalists out there, but thinking critically is always the first way to do it. Just stop and think, and let's see where it takes us from there.
Maybe a question for both Ferdi and Doja. Beyond pointing out misinformation, what can fact-checking organizations do to stop the spread of falsehoods online? Are there proactive strategies that organizations can implement? So, Ferdi, let me start with you on that.
Cool. I was kind of hoping for that. So one of the most proactive things fact-checking organizations do, other than fact-checking, is having side projects. When I say side projects, they're building tools, they're expanding into high schools, expanding into universities, they're building material for media literacy programs. So at the very front, these organizations are not only fact-checking in their daily operations, but they're also fighting against the spread of misinformation from the very beginning. So there's a lot of organizations in our work that have media literacy programs that work with universities, that work with local high schools, that have their own programs where they train teenagers and the elderly to fact check stuff on WhatsApp. Is one of the projects that's happening around the world. And a lot of the fact checking organizations are developing tools to verify and debunk some of the images and videos that we're seeing online. When it comes to publishing certain types of things, in my tenure at Doğrulpayı, the Turkish fact-checking organization that I founded, we did political fact-checking, we did verifying, debunking, but we also did informative pieces where we were able to see how inflation was throughout the years and where is it now. Education, in terms of education, where has Turkey come from and where it's going. So it's not only fact-checking that we're doing, we're also building information to provide to the public. So those are some ways the community and most of the organizations try to get ahead of the game, is what I want to say. But at the same time, it's not easy because there's not a lot of people, there's not a lot of us, and it's not easy to communicate what we do. You know, at the very essence, when you're checking something, you're already questioning what it is. So when you're questioning what it is, the opposite person is saying, hey, you're definitely against me in that sense. But no, it's curiosity. It's about getting to the truth. It's about providing the facts.
Great. Doja, on the ground in Mongolia, are there things that the Mongolian Fact-Checking Center does that are proactive in terms of curbing the spread of falsehoods online?
Yeah, we used to only take reactive actions before we became partners of the Meta, because we didn't have the resources necessary to actually engage and start thinking about more proactive measures. But at the beginning of this year, we did do a social media campaign where we targeted a younger audience, because that's what allowed, because they were more open-minded, and we thought with the resources that we had at the time and the time that we could allot to this social media information campaign on raising awareness on the appearance of misinformation in Mongolia, we thought targeting the younger population would bring better results for us. So the campaign was called Think First. So think first before you shared, or think first before you reacted in any way to certain information. So that way we thought, instead of actually chasing after the misinformation that has already been spread and done most of the damages that it needed to do, we thought we could prevent from some of its like spread not being done. And a younger population were the ones who were already most active on social media. So we thought this campaign probably continued for a little over a month mostly on our Facebook and Instagram pages, where we informed younger people using the means of short video content where one of our fact checker, the youngest one, explained what a misinformation is and why it's there, what kind of harm it does, and so on. So that was our first kind of attempt to do some kind of proactive activity. So currently now we are working to develop a set of training modules for different levels of actors in the information ecosystem, starting from the general public. And we're also trying to divide them into different age groups, because how different people of different age groups consume information and how they impact each other's trust in information, we found was very different. So for them, we're developing a training with the hope that they will become volunteer fact checkers as well. And then there's the second kind of more advanced set of trainings for journalists. And then we want to kind of reintroduce the 21st century way of fact checking to newsrooms, where we will kind of push more collaborative approach, not just within the newsroom, but also outside of the newsroom, where they could work with probably scientists or immunologists to fact check certain information that is at hand, because these trends come and go. For instance, like for the past 2 years, COVID has had a great impact on the information ecosystem, but some form of crisis will always be there. Like now it's continuing on with the Ukraine crisis, and who knows what will come next, right? So we're not pushing that, saying that newsrooms will need to work with scientists or immunologists, but we're kind of trying to create this practice that where newsrooms can work with professionals of different expertise depending on what the crisis at hand is. So that's the three different sets of training that we're now working on, and we're actually at the level where we are conceptualizing the project proposal and stuff. And in the executive summary, I quoted you, Jeff, where you said these bad actors who spread misinformation, they don't just want you to trust the misinformation that they're spreading, but they want you not to trust the good information that's out there. So we're trying to create a balance between but like kind of being cynical and having critical thinking to all the information that you get, but also having this feeling of trust in legacy, in more mainstream and professional media organizations. Although they do make mistakes, and a fact that we can share is more than 98% of all the falsehoods that we have debunked in Mongolia come from individual Facebook posts, not professional media organizations. So this is a message that we try to say all the time whenever we have a chance to say it, so that in a sense, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring or point information consumers to better sources so that they will be less vulnerable to bad information.
Cool. I've got an insightful question from Eric Wishart, who is an SPJ member in Hong Kong. And in the chat box, Eric wrote, I would like to ask, how effective do you think fact-checking is in fighting disinformation? Do you reach the people who believe the falsehoods? And if so, do you think it makes them change their mind? Does it discourage those who spread disinformation? Ferdi, not to put you on the spot, but what's your response to that question?
That's something I've been pondering for the last 10 years. But I think we have to realize that it's not about how many people change or are provided this perspective. It's one by one is what I always try to do, or what I always try to say. If we're able to allow one person to see the work that we're doing, the way that we're doing, in the openness that we're doing it in, because of the IFCN Code of Principles, you can know where a lot of these organizations are being funded. You can know what steps they take to fact check. You can verify their fact checks. We're telling all of our organizations to have one critical thing in their on their website, which is a corrections policy. If you're able to fact check the same fact check, no matter the fact checker fact checked it, and come at a different result, that's what we want to know. If that person is doing that, then we've got one person on our I don't want to say on our side, but on the side of the facts. Because it doesn't matter what they believe in, it doesn't matter what political identity they adhere to. It's a matter of information. Am I discouraged that that all the work we're doing is going for nothing? No, it's not. We're doing a lot of great work, and that work is being it's coming back to us. There's politicians that correct themselves. There's political world leaders that correct themselves because of fact checks. There's a lot of COVID-19 misinformation in India, which some of the homemade remedies that you can see in the COVID-19 database. It's very scary if a person reads that and says, hey, maybe I shouldn't drink this, that, or that, and it saved their lives because they saw that. So it's going to get tougher and tougher, and I think we need to tackle the root of the cause. We need to enhance our educations with media literacy tools, show kids how to absorb information, how to give the information back to individuals as well. So there's a whole science behind that, and hopefully misinformation is always going to be there. As long as there's two conflicting thoughts of any type of thing, there's always going to be a misinformation. But fact checkers and tech platforms are only one piece of that puzzle that are trying to curb the issue. As you might know, which Doja just referred to several times, the Meta 3PFC program, the third-party fact-checking program, is a huge initiative on Facebook, which was started by the IFCN. When I say started, I don't mean the actual thing started, but it was a letter that was presented to Facebook at the time and saying, listen, you have a serious problem on your platform. This is what we can bring to the table. And it's the same discussions that we're having with YouTube. A few months ago, the International Fact-Checking Network, its community members, not the International Fact-Checking Network, but its community members wrote a letter to YouTube saying, listen, you have a serious problem. These are some of the solutions that we have. So it's a combination of a lot of things. It's not only fact-checking that's curbing misinformation, it's these efforts that are also curbing the misinformation in the sphere. And as long as there is people out there that are wondering if that's true, I think we've achieved something in that sense. Hey, is that true? If that thought is in their head, then I think we've already achieved something.
Doja, how about you? From your perspective, has fact-checking been effective in combating misinformation in Mongolia? And kind of as a corollary, do you ever get discouraged by the avalanche of misinformation and disinformation online, where you just kind of throw up your hands and say, what's the use?
That's a very tricky question, the second one. Yeah, in terms of if fact-checking is effective or not, I personally don't think there's a question about that. Fact-checking needs to be done in some way, but it's also very important that the activity of fact-checking gets the attention and support that it deserves. For instance, now, because we are very fresh in this fact checking. We've been doing it for 2 years, 2.5 years maybe, and we've been Meta's partner for 1.5 months. So our feeling about this is very fresh. So we can compare when we were only doing fact checking on our own, and also compare what the impact is when we're doing with Meta. So the impact we can create with Meta, for instance, when you rate a content on Facebook and say it's false, then it sends a notification to everybody who has shared it before. And just yesterday, even Mongolian people, they are very thrilled about that. We got a chat saying, "Oh my God, I wanted to share this, and it's warning me that it's actually false before I share it." So these partnerships, this support from tech organizations, for instance, that the fact checking can get is very important. But fact checking, like just writing this probably very boring explanatory article explaining why this is false, is the core of this. Without that, without well-grounded, well-explained facts, you cannot just actually, without those, it will be kind of violation of somebody's freedom of expression, right? So yeah, I think it's very important that we get the support that we need and deserve. And does the act of fact checking discourage those who spread disinformation? I would say yes, very much. What we are observing in Mongolia is we are kind of disarming those bad actors of this very easily created debunks that can tailor people's minds, right? Change people's minds. So now that because we exist in Mongolia, bad actors will have to, or they are having to already think of better ways to fabricate information, so that while they're trying to figure that out, they cannot spread as many misinformation as possible. So as this goes, also it requires us to upgrade our skills, because they are now also thinking how to do what they do better. I don't think that's a very good choice of word. And do we get discouraged? From time to time, I would say yes. Mostly not because of of how abundant misinformation is in Mongolia or disinformation is in Mongolia, but because when we see people we think would not fall for something so basic, falls for it. But that's the nature of information. We just have this emotion and we act on it. So if he cannot tell misinformation from true and accurate information, what are we doing? What do we believe in? So we do get that kind of emotions from time to time. But then on the other hand, it's also another reason why this is so important that we need to do it.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, we're coming up with, or coming up at the 10-minute warning point in our discussion. So let me kind of start to wrap this up. There's a tradition in the international community talks from SBJ to ask a particular question of our guests, and I'm going to throw that question out right now. And that question is, what does press freedom mean to you? And let me start with Ferdi. So from your perspective, Ferdi, what does press freedom mean?
It could go anyway. But for me personally, I feel that press freedom means a society where press is free to express its own ideas, not hindered by a government, not protected by a government. It's free speech at its core. Journalists not being jailed, that's peace, freedom of press for me. I'm coming from it from a different angle. In a country where I live, there's a lot of journalists who are in jail and their voices have been silenced. So journalists need to write. And to allow journalists to write, you need to allow them to have that space to write. So that's what press freedom means for me. And my categories.
Wow. Oh, that's a very deep answer. The one I have might be a bit shallow, but I think press freedom is being able to have your own opinion. So it's not something that only has to do with the press or media. Why does media need to be free is so that you as an individual can have your own opinion and can express it and be respected for that. So yeah, it's not just being probably opinionated, but just being free. Because if you cannot think freely, how can you live freely? Yeah.
Or write freely.
Yeah,
Exactly.
really great answers, because I think, the underpinning of democracy, of course, is the ability to express those opinions and share those facts. And so I think you guys are really spot on in highlighting, the importance of press freedom and freedom of speech in general, not just for the media, but for everyday people. Cool. So let's see. Well, I want to thank Doja and Ferdi again for an interesting discussion that could easily go on for another hour. If you're not an SPJ member, this is the perfect time to sign up, and you can do that through the IC website, the International Community's website. If you have ideas for future programs, you can always reach the international community through that website. Again, many thanks to Doja and Ferdi for joining us this evening, or depending on your time zone, this morning. And thanks as well to you, our audience, for participating. And be careful and stay well. So thanks, everybody. Cool.
Thank you very much. It was a lovely discussion this morning, and thanks Ferdi and Jeff and Dan for this lovely conversation this morning.